Hi guys, welcome to my podcast. I started one with my dad.
Yeah, why?
Okay, because I'm nervous. This is my first time doing a podcast. I've never done anything like this before, but I decided to bring in someone with a lot of experience, over 30 years plus, and that is my father, Modise. So that means my name is Oratile Modise, and this is the Viewpoint. Papa, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you.
I appreciate you accepting this request. My first question then becomes, since you've spent over 30 years in media, what made you say yes to wanting to start the podcast with me after I asked you?
Well, it's because you are very persistent in the first place. As you know, you've been asking me, pastoring me for a while, and I wasn't sure that we should do this podcast, but ultimately when you persuaded me to do it, I do see the point of engaging with you as a generation after me, as my daughter, so that we can look at the world and the issues that face us as a nation from different points of view. So I'm looking forward to an interesting engagement with you.
Thanks, Papa, I appreciate it. Because I feel like we discussed that the whole point of the podcast would be to discuss what's going on in the country from a generational perspective. Because I can have my points as a young person, as a born free with like all these promises of, you know, a new rainbow nation and so on. And then you can also give your perspective of the contrast between how things were when you were my age versus how things are now. Which then makes me ask you, what gap do you see in South African media today, and what do you think, or how do you think we could fill that with the show?
I hope that through this podcast you'll be able to raise issues, topics with a variety of people, not only with myself, to address the issues that confront us, whether it be politics, it be economics, it be cultural, the entertainment space, the use of technology, social media, etc. So, for instance, you know, we used landlines when I grew up, and in many instances we did not even have phones in our homes. You know, some of us had to go walk to the post office to go and make a call there. But a few households had had phones, so it meant walking to somebody's home if you wanted to talk to them. If you made an appointment, well, in many instances you did not even make an appointment, but when you made an appointment, you had to go and talk to the person in person. Unlike now, where everybody is on their phones and they're engaging with a large number of people. But then, when we were younger, many of us, mostly they were what one would call personal engagement in conversation. It wasn't like with a broad spread of individuals like it is now. Okay.
So then how does that fill the gap now? Like, what gap do you think there is now? And
yeah, well, I mean, it's a good point, and I forgot to say something about that. Well, I think the relationships today are less personal than they were then. You know, if you wanted to communicate with a person, you had to talk to them, to the specific individual, make time to have conversations. In a context of a household or family, people had to have face-to-face conversations. And therefore, the modern era, where we live, I mean, in the modern times, we are always on the phones, you're talking to somebody, the person is looking elsewhere, there's a lot of media background, there's a lot of stuff in the background, television, etc. But having said that, there's a lot of information at the same time, you know, a proliferation of information, very accessible. And therefore, if you use media, you have to be extra careful what you consume, because some of it is not true, and some is true. With the algorithms, you can be directed to look at stuff that you may not be interested in. But in the past, you made a choice to listen to particular programming, and it was limited anyway.
Thank you. And now this begs me to ask the question based on, like you mentioned, you chose what you listened to. So in the political landscape of South Africa now, I would say you have quite the expertise based on the people you've interviewed throughout your career. So, considering you've interviewed almost every single president in the country from 94 until today, what have those experiences taught you about leadership in South Africa? And did they meet your expectations based on, what they said to you then and what is now, like what's happening now?
Firstly, the background of South Africa was a difficult one, as we know, before 1994 with apartheid and so on. And that's a long story on its own, and it's been recorded. There are many things to understand about that era. You take June 16, 1976 events, for instance. That uprising of the time was led by young people, by teenagers, high school students. So when the youth then were fed up, they took the challenge or the fight against apartheid to another level. Unfortunately, a lot of them, or hundreds of young people were killed. But that ignited a fire in the minds and the courage of young people across the country to say change must happen. Political prisoners then, including Mr. Mandela, Sisulu, and others, had to be released. And there's another prisoner of the time that we don't really talk much about, who was there first and for a longer time, Mr. Robert Sobukwe, etc. That ushered in a new era, which then produced the likes of Steve Biko, for instance, who, together with his peers, came up with the concept of black consciousness. Now let's come to 1994. The new era, the democratic South Africa, was brought about by the events prior 1990, which led to the release of the political leaders and the unbanning of political organizations such as ANC, PAC, AZAPO, and others. And then they negotiated with the government of the time, the whites-only government of National Party, and came up with a new system and the constitution, which was adopted in 1996. But by 1994, we had voted. Optimism, very, very optimistic time. And you have seen the images of people queuing for hours, waiting for their turn to vote. And the outcome of the elections was determined 3 days after voting started. So it was extended, the voting that is. And the reason that was so is that everybody wanted to participate, including the elderly, especially people who thought they were just about to reach the end of their lives. So the bigger mood was that of optimism. Why the optimism? For me personally and many other people, was that this was a chance for us to determine our destiny. And that is, for many of us, the point of freedom. That now that we are free, now that we are voting, we are going to determine the direction the country must take. Well, it's not exactly what we expected. There were many other challenges that maybe were not foreseen, but along the way, I think we also took our responsibility for granted to shape the country into the kind of country that would deliver the things we want. For instance, for me, I thought education would be the number one priority that we would be changed in South Africa. I also thought that within a short period of time, we will have economic transformation that gave people a chance to operate their own businesses in a substantial manner, and own those businesses and create employment, etc. But what I saw over time, and many people can attest to that, the small family businesses, shops that were there in our communities actually were wiped out. And today we argue and fight over spaza shops, when then we thought the people who already operated business would be growing their businesses. I thought we'd have too many professional people by now. I think we don't really have that many. So it's unfortunate that young people actually do not have jobs. I think it's a disappointment. I think it's a disappointment that not as many people operate their own businesses as they should. And I also think it's a disappointment that hope and the excitement that we had in '94 is not really there, except in the arts and in sports.
But then it makes me ask, right, based on what you've just described and your previous answer about how technology has also changed how we interact, do you think that the technology has now made the youth a bit more passive? Because now they just sign a petition. They don't have to get in the street anymore.
Yep.
Now they can just make their profile picture purple instead of actually, like doing what the ANC Women's League did before in the past, for the same challenges and so on. So it's like, do you think the youth of today is a bit more passive because of their privileges, like technological privileges, opportunities to be educated better? Because in your time it was Bantu education.
Yeah.
Now everybody is afforded I wouldn't say quality education, because now there's private schools and public schools, but I mean, the opportunity to get educated is there. Whereas in your time, it wasn't really an opportunity. It was more like, if you were lucky, you would get educated well, but it was a very big privilege as opposed to now. So do you think that has changed, or that's partly the reason why people or the youth now is not as engaged in their issues like your age group was? Or
Well, I think in our time in the 70s and the 80s, the conditions were different, and it's not like everybody wanted to be involved and participate in the political struggle. The freedom that came with democracy allows people across the board, different generations, to express themselves. Whether they use it, they do it on social media, they do it via a podcast such as yours, or they do it on radio, they do it television and other platforms, newspapers, etc. So I suppose many people would feel that they've got room and platforms to express themselves. So in the main, there's no need necessarily to rise up. But it is important, I would think, that they should be focused on what exactly do you want. So there are many things that grab attention. There's entertainment, there's the same social media. You can follow so many people, be it Black Coffee, Drake, you name them, all of the popular people. So sometimes those things can sidetrack you and therefore make you not pay attention to what is important. So I suppose, my contention would be that the young people must focus on specific issues that are relevant to them. To my mind, their economic well-being is paramount. Their cultural identity should be very important. And their aspirations politically and so on must be expressed. And a good majority are not involved in those things, and to their own detriment. But also the fact that South African youth are not separate from the world. They follow the trends of the world, so they are part of a global community. Whatever I've said now could be said in the United States, could be said in Europe, and probably would be said in across the continent as well.
But then I also feel like politics then for young people, is a bit overwhelming. So then how do we pivot to where we can educate them and not water it down, but also not overwhelm them? Like how do we make that information accessible to the audience that we intend to engage with?
I suppose you could say, what contribution can you make? Because it's not like everybody is going to listen to you or listen to me. There are many voices in South Africa and around the world. So how do you make certain issues popular in the public domain? Maybe that's the idea. It is by identifying the trends around the world and the trends in the country and addressing those specific issues with the relevant people who are informed and are involved in the particular activities. I'll give you an example. Personally, I'm curious to know how the Springboks do what they do, how they moved from an all-white group to now a multiracial, non-racial team that is winning, irrespective of things not going well in other areas of life. I'm interested to know that. I'm interested to know how some South African entertainers are doing very well. I mean, who would have thought that a DJ could become such a global phenomenon? I'm talking about Black Coffee as an example. And there are many other South Africans of the same type. There are academics, South Africans, who operate elsewhere in the world. There are South Africans who lead big companies around the world. But my sense is we don't have the benefit of understanding how they achieve their goals, and it would be useful to hear more from them than us just complaining all the time. And we've got reason to complain. But learning from one another, I think, would be a better approach.
Fair. But then, okay, in the situation of like elections, and how do we make manifestos accessible for people? How do we make, the information or the people's needs be heard easier? Because I feel like people are only interested based on, they all want this country to function based on what your generation was told was gonna happen now that we are free.
Yes.
And it's almost like it's the opposite, but it's been painted on top of. It's like putting lipstick on a pig, as they say.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what's been happening for some time now. Maybe initially it was really, really good and people had opportunities, but now it's very bleak, especially when you listen to what people are going through, because the gap is widening as like people are getting educated. So many people are graduates, but you don't see the evidence of that.
Yes.
You don't see, the pep in the youth step. They did what they were told was gonna work, and then it didn't work. So like, how do you fix that? Whose fault is it, number one?
Yeah.
Is it the youth's fault, your generation's fault, the government's fault? And also then, how do we get to the solution?
There's a word that's used a lot around the world, and that's something called agency. That if you want things to happen in your life, you've got to have agency, be proactive. Now, let's start with information that you're talking about. That if you want to know stuff, you've got to go out of your way to find it, to engage it, to learn, to understand. Information and knowledge do not come to you. And my sense is that a lot of people, not only young people, but a lot of us as human beings, we somehow think it's somebody's responsibility to make you understand something. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. You've got to go out of your way to go and understand something, all right? If you want to do, let's say, a podcast like this, you've got to figure out how it's done. You've got to check how podcasts are done. It's been recorded now, right? The crew that's putting this together had to learn. And if I may say, it includes your brother as well, who's part of this, and his friend Tendo. Now, they had to learn to understand how to do stuff like this, and they are doing it on their own. So it just so happens that they are the production team for this episode, but they learned what they learned on their own, and it's their own initiative. So over time, I think, especially in the Black community, we stepped aside from our lives and made it somebody else's problem. And we delegated to the political system and the politicians to run our lives. That's why you find the Black communities in particular, people do not engage with those that they elect. They elect them themselves. They don't engage with them, pay attention to what they get up to. And when things do not work, what do? We go to the street, we have protests, public protests, service delivery protests, and do something worse. Personally, I don't agree with the vandalizing of public infrastructure. What's the point of burning down a clinic if you're not happy with the service delivery of a municipality? It doesn't make sense, because you need the clinic, you need the school. You can't dig up the road. That's the road that must be used by
the taxi to take you to work.
The people who are going to work.
Yeah.
But you participated in electing people, but did not hold them accountable, and did not also make inputs on how communities should be run. So I repeat the point by saying the biggest mistake we make was to delegate our responsibility for ourselves first, our responsibility to our families, our responsibility and solidarity with our communities. And then we hoped and thought and expected that things should work, but it doesn't work like that. You've got to have agency, I think. And I'm saying this looking at how things work around the world.
Well, with what you've said, then what conversations do you feel like are missing from our communities, like the townships, the suburbs, our workplaces? Like, how do we bring those conversations that are necessary back through this podcast?
By talking about issues that matter, emphasizing the point of agency, that no one is going to give you anything, unfortunately. You know, initially we thought and expected that, and that's why the typical conversation in South Africa is government must do this, government must do that, government must do its job, yes. Come up with appropriate policies, regulations, etc. But allow space for individual citizens to make things happen. You know, remove the constraints that make it difficult to achieve your aspirations, especially when you're a young person. And that's what is going on in sport, for instance. I use the example of rugby, I use football as well. If you have sports academies and sports is played in schools, then young people who are that way inclined can realize their ambitions. Similarly, in the art space, you could achieve that. But in terms of the professions and so on, we've got to find a way of achieving our aspirations, especially young people. But the economy, we must agitate that it must be opened up enough to create space for young aspiring people to do something meaningful with their lives. That it doesn't matter what kind of work you do. But to sit there and waste away your time and your youth is unfair, but no one is going to fix it for you. You've got to pay attention and agitate, engage on the things that as a young person you would like to see happen in South Africa.
I agree, because I have voiced my opinion on quite a few things many times, but I feel like with the way things are going now, it would be interesting to see what more we can do, how we can create creative ways to agitate, you know, the system and basically, you know, push for change and just storytelling. Which then makes me ask you, why do you believe storytelling is important in shaping the identity of South Africans today? Because we have a sub story of, oh, we were oppressed and then, you know, Mandela came, saved us. But like, how do we change our story today? Because I feel like we're becoming that child that had so much potential but never actually reached said potential. How do we shift to becoming the one who did?
There's a concept called learned helplessness. I think we have to shake ourselves out of that, or have the victim mentality to say, well, because, you know, I've got issues, problems, therefore I'm incapable of fixing them. And I'm saying it in a societal sense, right? You know, going back to storytelling part of your question, storytelling is what helped us understand what generations before us experienced and how they lived like. And that's why we have culture. Without storytelling, we wouldn't know who we are, culturally speaking. Not only us in South Africa, but around the world. If you look at any culture, Chinese, Japanese, European, Congolese, you name it, right? It is via storytelling that culture is established. It is via storytelling that religion is established. If you are Christian or Muslim and your belief systems are based on what? Are based on the stories that are being told from the perspective of the particular religion. Ideologies, political, in the world, they happen via storytelling. I've already mentioned culture. By that I mean including language, you know. If there was no storytelling, we would not know what languages we speak, etc., etc. So it is important that through storytelling we exchange views, we exchange knowledge, and in the process we exchange values, and then from there define our aspirations ourselves, and then and learn from one another. And I'm a strong believer in learning from others, as well as utilizing the information that you get to take your own aspirations a step further.
And then with that being said, what do you hope that the audience gains from, especially young people, what do you hope that they gain from watching the podcast, engaging with it, and pretty much, what are your expectations of the future of the podcast as well?
Yeah.
As we wrap up.
Well, I mean, I don't think my response is only for the benefit of young people, but anyone who's making stuff happen in the world. My observation is that they're students of life. They always learn, and they also pitch up for the dreams they have. So I've got interest in a variety of things, and I try to familiarize myself with whatever useful information on the basis of learning from others. You want to understand business and how to build a successful big global company? Study what other people are doing around the world. You want to build an efficient system politically and economically? I'm very curious to know how the Japanese did it immediately after the Second World War. In modern times, I'm interested to understand how the Chinese are building their society. And so it goes. It's not a privileged thing for other people. Information is freely available. One thing for sure, that we cannot take away from anyone or criticize anyone for it. So many opportunities to learn. What I would like to see happen, and I hope that this is something you will attempt to do. I'll always be there to offer advice, and you can always have me once in a while as your guest. If you think I'm a reasonably good guest for your podcast, I'll make a comeback. But talk to people who can teach us a lot. It doesn't have to be about politics only. It's about life, really, generally. And let's tell stories of people who are resilient, who are ambitious, who are patient, and who are community building oriented, and have got a lot to offer the world, who are constructive. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. Constructive in any way. Here's a point as we conclude that I'd like to make. It's interesting as human beings that we love I'll talk from the perspective of a football fan. We love our football clubs. We expect so much from our favorite sports players, right? Mm-hmm. But for some reason, we don't expect the same from ourselves. The very fact that we are so passionate about the sports teams and athletes and individuals that we like in the world, we are very committed, we are passionate about them, and have expectations that they should achieve something for us, for our enjoyment as supporters. But we don't support ourselves in the same way. So I hope that through this podcast you can ignite the fire in us, and if we're stuck, show the light that you can always get out of the situation you find yourself in by being exposed to interesting people and interesting ideas, and therefore have an ongoing engagement with your audiences where they themselves, that group of people who will watch the podcast, engage with one another, exchange ideas, support each other, and that way people will be uplifted. There's an expression in Setswana bare motho ke motho ka batho. Now, they don't mean motho ke motho ka batho, I read that work against people. The implication is that whatever you do must be for the benefit of other people, but you can only do it with the help and assistance and involvement, input of other people. If I were you, which I'm not, but take my advice, ask your audience to give you input on what topics they would like you to cover and the guests that you should have on your podcast, and I can guarantee you it's going to be a very interesting community that grows out of this. That's what I would like to see.
Well, thanks for joining me, Papa. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for watching. I know that was my first podcast and I'm very nervous and shy, but I hope as time goes, I build my confidence, build my personality on screen, and once again, tell the right stories that people want to hear that benefit them, as opposed to the stories that are currently available.
Sure.
Because there's a lot going on in South Africa in a positive way. There's a very good undercurrent. There's people who are, creating stuff positively for the benefit of the whole community, the young people, old people, black people, everybody. Sure. And I feel like that needs a spotlight, and that's what encouraged me to do this. So Thank you for being my first guest.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of courage, by the way, to do what you're trying to do. It's not easy, I know. I mean, myself, it's just repeat performance over time, and I gained the confidence and the ability to be involved in the work through the help of so many people. But let's not forget to thank Prison Break and people who operate their businesses here for allowing us to have this podcast shot here. This is a nice hangout, and I recommend it to anyone who's in Joburg, that if you want to spend time with your family, come to Prison Break and have your lunch and have your juices, your teas, coffee here.
This was nice, actually.
And good atmosphere as well to have this type of chat with your loved ones. Thank you.